They didn't even try to hide the laughter. She had barely stepped through the glass doors of Prestia Motors when it started. A glance, a whisper, a smirk. Then a muttered, "Lost, maybe?" from somewhere near the coffee bar. Naomi Grant pretended not to hear. Her sneakers made a soft squeak against the marble tile as she moved past the chrome-lined Maseratis and polished Porsches. She wasn't lost. She knew exactly why she was here. She also knew she didn't look the part. A white t-shirt that had been through too many laundry cycles, jeans that clung to her hips but spoke more to comfort than couture, and a bag slung casually over one shoulder. No makeup, no jewelry, just her and the quiet certainty that she belonged, but no one else in the room agreed. A salesman, Blake Thompson, as his engraved name tag declared, had clocked her the moment she walked in. He made no attempt at a smile. Instead, he met her with the kind of stare that labeled people before they spoke. Naomi had seen that look before, in boardrooms, at fundraising galas, even in grocery stores. It was the look that said, "You are not what we expect. You are not what we want." "Can I help you?" Blake asked, each word dipped in disapproval. "Yes," Naomi replied, steady. "I'm interested in the Jaguar, crimson coupe, parked up front." Blake followed her gaze, then chuckled. "That's a limited edition model, very exclusive. Starts at $180. He paused, eyes traveling from her t-shirt to her shoes. "You may want to check out our used car division. It's just down the street." He gestured, not toward the car, but toward the exit. Naomi didn't move. "I'd still like to learn more about it." Blake leaned slightly forward, his voice lowering like he was letting her in on a hard truth. "That car isn't available for unscheduled viewings. We show it to serious clients. With appointments, pause. Maybe grab a brochure," he added, already turning away. Naomi watched him cross the room to greet a middle-aged couple who had just arrived. They wore matching designer coats and smiles meant for Instagram. Blake greeted them like royalty. She watched him usher them directly to the car he'd just told her was off-limits. She felt the flush in her cheeks. Not embarrassment, but something slower and heavier. Anger? Maybe. But not for herself. She thought of the girls she worked with. Girls who walked into schools and stores every day and were told in small, silent ways that they didn't belong. Girls who learned to shrink their hopes to fit the boxes others had built for them. Naomi had promised herself long ago that she would never shrink. Still, she stood there, frozen, for a moment too long. "Hi," a voice beside her said. "I can tell you about the car if you want." She turned. He was young, barely out of college by the look of him. A name tag that read Jordan, and a suit that didn't quite fit. His voice was tentative, almost apologetic, like he knew he wasn't supposed to offer. Naomi gave him the smallest smile. "I'd appreciate that." Jordan led her to the car and began describing it. Details, specs, performance, all with the enthusiasm of someone who still loved his job. Naomi listened, nodding, but her eyes kept drifting toward Blake. She watched him open the door for the woman in the designer coat, watched her slide into the exact seat Naomi had asked to view. "Is it okay if I—" Naomi asked Jordan, nodding toward the door. Jordan hesitated. "It's supposed to be appointment only, but—" But before he could finish, Blake's voice cut through the room. "She's not a client," he said, loud enough for the words to echo. Naomi froze. Blake walked over, face tight, smile gone. "I already explained the policy," he said, voice sharp. "Please, don't make a scene. You're interrupting a scheduled viewing." There were eyes on them now, phones raised, whispers floating like smoke. "I'm prepared to make a purchase today," Naomi said, her voice level. Blake laughed, not softly, not kindly. It was the kind of laugh meant to humiliate. "A cash purchase?" he repeated, looking her up and down. "Sure you are." Naomi felt the humiliation rising, but it didn't drown her. She stood her ground. "I believe my money is as good as anyone's," she said. Blake stepped closer. "Let me be clear. Either you leave now, or I'll have security escort you." The room fell into complete silence. The couple Blake had been showing the car to looked away. Jordan stood frozen, guilt written all over his face. Naomi took one last breath. One last look at the room, at the chrome, the suits, the smirks. And then, without a word, she turned and walked out the door, past the sneers, and into the sunlight. Outside, she pulled out her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call the press. She called her husband. And as the call connected, a small, knowing smile spread across her face. One that didn't come from revenge, but from something deeper. The certainty that this story wasn't over. Not yet. Naomi didn't speak right away when she walked through the door of their Brentwood home. A modestly elegant estate, tucked behind tall trees and a long stone path. The house was quiet. Afternoon light poured across the hardwood floors, casting shadows that danced along the walls. She stood in the entryway for a moment, still gripping her keys, unsure if her hands were shaking from frustration or the echo of humiliation. From his office down the hall, Christopher looked up. He'd learned over the years to read her silence. When she didn't call out his name or toss her keys into the ceramic bowl by the door like usual, he rose and met her halfway. He said nothing, just placed his hand gently on her back and led her to the sofa in the sunroom. She sat, stiff-backed, still not meeting his eyes. "I'm guessing it wasn't the experience you were hoping for," he said softly. Naomi let out a slow, tired laugh, one with no humor. "I wasn't hoping for much, Chris. I just wanted to buy my sister a birthday present." She paused. Her voice was level, but something deep beneath it threatened to crack. "I walked into that dealership thinking it was just a transaction, just a car. But it turned into something else. It turned into a reminder." Christopher sat beside her, quiet. He knew she'd get to it in her own time. Naomi exhaled slowly. "It's not that I was surprised. I've seen this before. I've lived it before. But it still stings when you realize people don't see you. Not really. They see a stereotype. They see limits. They see someone to ignore, dismiss, or pity. Never someone to respect." She finally looked at him. Her eyes didn't ask for sympathy. They asked for space, for truth. "I didn't cry, if that's what you're wondering," she added with a soft shake of her head. "I didn't even get angry. I just stood there in a room full of luxury cars and polished lies, knowing I could buy every single one of them if I wanted to. And yet, they acted like I didn't even deserve to breathe their air." Christopher's expression tightened, but he remained still. Naomi had always been the stronger of the two when it came to swallowing pain with poise. But moments like this pulled something primal from him. He had spent his life building Grantian technologies from the ground up, using his quiet nature as armor and intellect as currency. But the man who sat here now was not just a founder or a financier. He was a husband, listening to the woman he loved recount the thousandth subtle insult wrapped in a smile. "What do you want to do?" he asked, after a long silence. Naomi leaned back, gazing through the tall windows to the garden beyond, where sunlight touched the tips of the rose bushes she'd planted 3 springs ago. "Part of me wants to forget it," she said. "Just go to another place and buy the car in peace. But then I think about the girls at Future First. The ones who walk into rooms and get talked over, looked through, told they should be grateful just to be there. I think about the fact that I had the luxury of walking away with dignity, because I knew who I was, and more importantly, I knew what I could do. But most of them? They don't get that chance. They internalize it. They shrink. And one day, they stop dreaming about crimson coupes altogether because the world told them those dreams weren't for people like us." Her voice faltered for a second. "I don't want to punish that man," she said finally. "I want to wake him up. I want to wake them all up." Christopher nodded slowly. "Then let's wake them up." She looked over, brow raised. "I'm serious," he said. "We can do this. But not with fury. With precision. We don't need to shout. We just need to show them exactly what they missed." Naomi gave a short laugh. "What are you thinking, Mr. Grant?" "Oh, nothing dramatic," he said with a sly smile. "Not buying the dealership out from under them, though God knows it's tempting." She chuckled now, leaning into his shoulder. "Something quieter. Smarter," he continued. "Something they won't see coming until it's too late." Naomi didn't reply at first. Then she whispered, "Let them see me. All of me. Let them realize who they turned away, and what they revealed about themselves in doing it." She stood up, the weight on her shoulders not entirely gone, but now shared. "I want Jordan to know he did the right thing," she added, her voice softer now. "He was the only one in that room who treated me like a person. That deserves to mean something." Christopher nodded. "It will." They spent the next hour together, planning. Not revenge, not a spectacle. A lesson. One designed not to destroy, but to illuminate. And as the evening sun dipped low over Brentwood, Naomi walked out into the garden barefoot, the grass cool beneath her feet, the breeze gentle on her skin. She stood there a long time, her eyes closed, letting the stillness sink in. Tomorrow would not be about reclaiming power. It would be about redefining it. Blake Thompson had never been impressed by wealth. Or at least, that's what he told himself. After years in luxury sales, the glint of chrome and the hiss of expensive tires had dulled to background noise. He had seen old money, new money, football money, tech money. It didn't matter anymore. He could spot a buyer the moment they walked through the door, or so he believed. That morning, he arrived at Prestia Motors 15 minutes early, sipping an overpriced espresso and scrolling through emails about inventory shortages and a potential bonus package tied to year-end sales. Yesterday's incident, as he referred to it, was already fading in his mind. Another distraction, he thought. Another dreamer hoping a smile and a sob story might score her a test drive in a car worth more than her yearly income. He didn't even remember her name. At precisely 10:06 a.m., a sound unlike any other rolled through the front drive. It was not loud, but it demanded attention. Deep, smooth, a presence rather than a noise. Blake glanced up from the front desk and froze. A Rolls Royce Phantom, deep midnight with brushed chrome accents, pulled to a slow, elegant stop in front of the main entrance. Not the kind you lease for weddings. This was the long wheelbase custom edition. The paint shimmered like oil under sunlight, so dark it looked like a shadow had materialized into metal. The uniformed driver stepped out with practiced ease, walking around to open the passenger door with the kind of grace Blake recognized from years in high-end service. And from the rear emerged a man who could have been plucked from the pages of a GQ editorial. Tall, clean-cut, understated power in every movement. The tailored charcoal suit whispered money, not the kind that flaunted, but the kind that dictated boardrooms and signed billion-dollar checks in quiet rooms. Blake straightened his tie and strode forward with a practiced smile. He had no idea who this was, but his instincts screamed opportunity. "Good morning, sir," he said warmly, extending a hand. "Welcome to Prestia Motors. Blake Thompson, sales director. It's an honor to have you with us." The man accepted the handshake briefly, then let go with a nod. "Christopher Grant," he replied simply. The name didn't register immediately, but it didn't matter. The car alone made him VIP. Blake stepped into host mode. "We'd be delighted to assist you today. Are you looking for something in particular? We have just received a limited series McLaren." "I'm here for the Jaguar," Christopher said, cutting him off without malice. "The crimson coupe in your front display. My wife was here yesterday to inquire about it." Blake blinked. "Your wife?" Christopher's tone didn't shift, but his eyes sharpened. "White t-shirt, jeans, about 5'8". You suggested she visit your used lot instead." The memory slammed into Blake like a glass door. The woman from yesterday. The sneakers. The calm voice. His throat tightened. Yes, I recall. Though I didn't realize—" He stammered, suddenly unsure of what to do with his hands. "There may have been a misunderstanding. We often—" "There was no misunderstanding," Christopher interrupted, his voice now wrapped in ice. "You saw her. You dismissed her. She left without raising her voice, without making a scene. But that doesn't mean she left unseen." Other staff had begun to notice. A few stepped forward cautiously. Jordan, standing behind a desk at the far end of the room, paled when he recognized Christopher. He lowered his head slightly, already knowing what was coming. Blake opened his mouth to salvage something. An apology, a pitch, a plea. But Christopher kept speaking. She came home and told me the story. Not just about what happened, but how it made her feel. And more importantly, how often it happens. How she didn't want to retaliate. How she didn't want to humiliate anyone. She just wanted someone to learn. There was no need to raise his voice. Every syllable landed like a stone in a still pond. I came here to buy that Jaguar for my sister-in-law, Christopher continued. But I was also in the market for a complete fleet replacement for one of our corporate offices, 7 vehicles, and possibly more in the coming year. But now, I'm no longer sure this is the right place to do business. A silence fell over the showroom so thick, even the air felt still. Jordan stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Grant," he said gently, I didn't know who your wife was, but I tried to help her. I gave her the specs. I told her I'd show her the interior if I could get clearance." Christopher turned to him and nodded. "I know," he said simply. "She remembered that, and so do I." He looked back at Blake. "Here's what I want to happen. The Jaguar will be handled by Jordan, fully. Every piece of paperwork, delivery, communication. I trust him to do so with integrity, because he treated my wife like a person when no one else in this building did." Blake looked stricken. His skin had gone pale beneath his tan. He tried to speak, but Christopher was already turning away. As he passed the crimson Jaguar, he ran a hand slowly across its curve. "My wife has excellent taste," he said quietly. Then he turned, meeting the eyes of every staff member in the room. "And so does character." With that, he walked toward the glass exit, his steps calm and deliberate. Behind him, the silence cracked open into murmurs. Some of the younger staff looked shaken. A few of the senior ones simply avoided eye contact. Jordan remained still, unsure whether to smile or sweat. Blake? He just stood there, watching the man disappear behind the glinting doors, knowing the lesson had landed too late. But not too late to change. Blake Thompson never expected to find himself standing in the middle of a community center gymnasium on Jefferson Street, holding a stack of folding chairs and trying not to be noticed by the 10-year-olds darting around his knees. The walls were painted with murals, vivid scenes of black heroes, local legends, and words like respect, voice, and possibility written in bold letters. There were no leather couches here, no polished chrome or espresso machines, just hard floors, high ceilings, and the sound of life, unfiltered, unapologetic, and very, very real. It had been 2 weeks since that morning at Prestia Motors. Since the Phantom. Since Christopher Grant walked in and undid Blake's illusion of control with 12 words and one unforgettable look. He hadn't been fired. That might have been easier. Instead, Christopher had extended a different offer: volunteer at Naomi's foundation for 1 month. No shortcuts, no photo ops, no optics, just show up. Listen. Learn. It was, in Christopher's words, an education money can't buy. Blake had said yes because he had no other option. But by the end of the first week, something inside him had started to shift. At first, he treated it like a punishment, checking the clock every 10 minutes, staying quiet during the sessions, saying the bare minimum to the staff. He kept his designer watch hidden under his sleeve, unsure if it would offend or attract unwanted attention. But the kids didn't care. They didn't ask who he was or what he drove. They only cared if he could shoot a basketball without looking ridiculous. He couldn't. Then came Tyrone. Tyrone was small for his age, but moved like someone who'd learned to take up space with his words. He had the kind of laugh that bounced off walls and a mind that moved faster than anyone could keep up with. He wore scuffed sneakers and carried a sketchbook everywhere. One afternoon, after a workshop about leadership, Tyrone looked up at Blake and asked with total sincerity, "Do you think I could run my own company one day?" Blake had hesitated. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he wasn't sure Tyrone would believe that he believed it. "Yes," he finally said. "I think you already have the instincts for it." Tyrone squinted at him. Then why do people like you look surprised when I say it out loud? The question hung in the air like a judgment that Blake hadn't expected, but knew he deserved. That night, Blake stayed long after the kids had gone home. He helped Naomi and her team stack chairs, wipe tables, refill snack bins. No one asked him to. No one clapped. But something about being useful, really useful, felt foreign and needed at the same time. Naomi approached him quietly as he was folding a plastic table. "You're staying late," she said. He nodded, not looking up. Felt like I owed a little more than just showing up. Naomi studied him for a moment. She wasn't the type to hand out compliments cheaply. "Tyrone talks about you," she said. "He says you listen." Blake swallowed the sudden lump in his throat. "He asks hard questions." She smiled. "That's because he doesn't know how to pretend. None of them do. And that's what makes this place sacred. We don't train them to shrink. We train them to stand." Blake set the table down. "I didn't realize how much of the world tells them otherwise." Naomi leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "It's easy to see what someone wears and think you know their story. Harder to see the invisible weight they carry just to survive the day." He nodded slowly. "I used to think professionalism was about polish, presentation. Now I'm starting to think it's about how you show up for others." Naomi didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was softer. "I've seen people change, Blake. But it only sticks when the change comes from wanting to do better. Not just being told to." He met her eyes. "I want to do better." They stood there in silence, not as employer and volunteer, not as victim and offender, but as two people navigating the uncomfortable, necessary terrain of truth. The next day, Blake returned not in a pressed suit, but in jeans and a t-shirt. He stayed for the art classes, helped a kid name his first business idea, talked to a grandmother about scholarships. By the end of the week, he was laughing again, really laughing, at jokes too silly for his former self to appreciate. Meanwhile, Naomi quietly oversaw the final details of the car purchase. Jordan had handled the entire transaction with grace and professionalism, arranging delivery of the Jaguar to Naomi's sister as a surprise. The moment her sister saw it, crimson red, tied in a silver bow, she burst into tears and hugged Naomi with the force of a second chance. "You always see people," her sister whispered. "Even when they don't see you." Naomi smiled. "That's how we change the world. One person at a time." Later that evening, Naomi received an email from Prestia Motors' regional director. A formal apology, an invitation to return, and an offer to partner with the Future First Foundation for a new initiative promoting diversity and inclusion in their sales training. She didn't respond right away. She needed to think. It wasn't about acceptance. It was about accountability. And that was something she knew had to be earned, not emailed. As the month neared its end, Blake stood in front of a small group of new volunteers and spoke for the first time without a script. "I used to believe success was about knowing who to impress," he said. "Now I think it's about who you're willing to understand." He didn't mention Naomi's name or Christopher's. He didn't need to, because the real transformation wasn't in what he said, but how he now chose to see. The air was thick with the scent of roasted coffee and summer honeysuckle as the glass doors of Prestia Motors swung open, not for a customer, but for a community. For the first time in its history, the dealership was hosting something it had never even considered before. A local outreach event, not a brand launch, not an elite test drive, a gathering, a coming together of stories, faces, families. There were food trucks lined along the front sidewalk, kids chasing one another between luxury sedans, elders sitting under white canopies and telling stories between bites of lemon cake. Naomi stood near the side entrance, watching with quiet amazement as the dealership that once turned its back on her now offered itself as a platform for something far more meaningful than commerce. It had been a month since the day Christopher stepped onto that showroom floor and redefined the balance of power with just a name and a presence. But the impact didn't end there. It rippled outward, into hearts, into systems, into decisions that would leave lasting marks. Blake, once the face of shallow judgment, now stood at a folding table near the children's art station, carefully pouring juice into small paper cups. He wore a Future First t-shirt and sneakers, his usual posture of authority replaced by something lighter, humbler. A boy tugged at his sleeve and asked if he could try to sit in the McLaren. "Sure, buddy," Blake replied, bending down to his level. "But only if you promise to teach me how to draw like you did last week." The boy grinned, and Naomi felt something shift again inside her. Not forgiveness. That had come earlier, in a quiet moment between her and Blake when no one else was watching. What she felt now was confirmation that people could change if they were truly willing to be changed. Nearby, Jordan stood with Christopher, guiding a group of teenagers through the features of a new electric model and explaining how design could influence innovation. He'd been promoted weeks earlier, not just for how he handled the Jaguar transaction, but for the steady, quiet leadership he'd shown ever since. Christopher had taken him under his wing, offering not just mentorship, but a seat at the table. And as for Naomi, this moment was never about proving anything. It wasn't about revenge, or even redemption. It was about reclamation, reclaiming space, reclaiming dignity, reclaiming the power of being seen and heard on her own terms. She felt a hand slide into hers and looked over to find Christopher smiling at her. "They keep asking me to give a speech," he said, "but I think they're waiting for you." Naomi chuckled. "I don't have anything prepared." "You never need to," he replied. "You just tell the truth. That's always been enough." So she walked to the front of the showroom where a small crowd had gathered. Kids, volunteers, Prestia employees, foundation staff, community leaders, and even a few of the same customers who had watched her walk out in silence that day. She stood in front of the crimson Jaguar, now polished to perfection, gleaming like it had finally found its place. "I came into this building a few weeks ago just looking to buy a gift," Naomi began, her voice calm, steady. "What I got instead was a lesson. Not a new one, unfortunately, but a painful reminder of how easily we're misjudged." There was no bitterness in her tone, only clarity. But something powerful happened after that. Something that started with an insult, but ended with an invitation. An invitation to reflect, to evolve, to do better, not just as individuals, but as a culture, as a business, as a community. She paused and looked around, locking eyes with people who had become part of this journey in ways none of them expected. True luxury isn't leather seats or 0 to 60 stats. It's being treated with dignity no matter how you walk into a room. It's seeing someone for who they are, not what they wear, not where they come from, not what box they've been forced into. Real status isn't bought. It's built, moment by moment, in how we choose to show up for each other. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of reckoning, full of promise. Later, Christopher stood beside Blake and said, "This is a good start, but we both know it has to continue." Blake nodded. "It will. I've already spoken with the board about implementing bias training across all our branches, and we're allocating funds toward internship opportunities through Future First." "Keep going," Christopher said. Not for show, for substance. Naomi smiled watching them. She didn't need applause. What she needed was already unfolding. Systems shifting, eyes opening, people stepping up. As the sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows over the showroom floor, Naomi noticed Tyrone, now wearing a staff badge, showing a younger kid how to use the tablet inside the Tesla. He glanced up, saw her watching, and gave her a proud little wave. She waved back. "You did good," Christopher said beside her. Naomi leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "We did right," she whispered. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and the lights dimmed, she and Christopher walked the lot in silence. The Phantom still sat near the entrance, a quiet reminder of the day that started it all. But Naomi's eyes were drawn elsewhere. To the people, the energy, the shift that could not be undone. What had begun with humiliation ended in transformation. Not because she demanded to be seen, but because she refused to be unseen. And as they reached their car, Naomi turned to Christopher and said, "You know, I never really needed that Jaguar." He smiled. I know. But I did need this. He opened the door for her. And now, she added, so do they. Because sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't start with shouting. They start with someone walking into a room others say they don't belong in, and staying long enough to change it. Naomi Grant walked into a luxury car dealership as a simple, unassuming woman in a white t-shirt, calm, kind, and entirely unprepared for the tidal wave of quiet disrespect waiting for her. They didn't see her for who she was. They saw only what they wanted to see. A black woman who, in their eyes, didn't belong. Without raising her voice or losing her dignity, she was dismissed, judged, and made to feel invisible. But Naomi wasn't just a woman looking to buy a car. She was a builder of futures, a quiet force of change, and the wife of one of the most powerful tech entrepreneurs in the country. And when that truth walked through their showroom doors the next day, in the form of her husband, Christopher Grant, stepping out of a $500,000 Rolls Royce, they were forced to confront something much bigger than wealth. They had to face their own bias, their own blindness, and the system they upheld by default. But what makes this story extraordinary isn't just the twist. It's the choice Naomi made after. She could have used her influence to shame, fire, or humiliate those who wronged her. Instead, she chose a higher road. Transformation through awareness. Education instead of ego. She gave them a mirror, and in that reflection, some, like Blake Thompson, chose to see beyond their own pride and begin again. From the cold floors of a dealership to the warm classrooms of her foundation, Naomi's story is a powerful reminder that real power doesn't need to announce itself. It shows up in character, in how you treat people when you believe they have nothing to offer you, in your ability to turn injustice into invitation. So, what can we learn from her? First, don't judge anyone by how they look, what they wear, or where they come from. You never know the strength, the story, or the value that person holds. Second, when you have the chance to use your platform, whatever size it is, use it to elevate others, not just yourself. Speak up when it's uncomfortable. Create space where others have been pushed out. And finally, remember that change doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks in quietly, chooses grace over revenge, and ends up changing everything. If Naomi's journey moved you, if it made you reflect on your own assumptions or inspired you to stand a little taller in your truth, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling the stories that matter. Stories that challenge bias, celebrate dignity, and remind us all of what true worth looks like. Because the next story could be yours, or someone you love, and together we can keep shifting the culture, one powerful narrative at a time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next chapter.